Good afternoon. Welcome to this Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor John Hinton and I'm chairing this meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, that if you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the Modern Gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film or photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. We're also joined this afternoon by Rebecca Hewitt, Corporate Manager for Finance, Commissioning and Procurement, by Fiona Dumel, Director of Growth and Climate Change, Jan Robinson, Corporate Manager for Governance, and Dave Busby, who is the Councillor Dave Busby, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance. Can I move to the agenda, please? Any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Grandon.
To receive declarations of pecuniary or other registrable or non-registrable interests by members. Are there any to declare? No. Good. Receive notifications of petitions?
None received, Chair.
Questions by the public?
None received.
Questions by councillors?
None received, Chair.
We move on to item 6, which is BOS/22/01, Draft General Fund and Housing Revenue Account, 2023-24 and the 4-year outlook. I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce the report and report to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. You may know the story of Peter and the Wolf, where Peter cries wolf once too often, and when he does see the wolf, nobody believes him. And from my experience, I'm talking to councillors at the moment, when I suggest that we're having a tough time financially, and even worse one next year, they all say, oh, we've heard that before, you always claim you're hard up, and then you come up with a surplus. So this is your opportunity to prove that this year we are serious about the situation we're in, and we want you to nail it down so that the other councillors will take it seriously. What we'll do is Rebecca has a presentation which we'll go through, but we'll stop on each pertinent slide to try and get agreement or any questions that you want on those particular items before we move on. So we'll take it step by step. Rebecca.
First mistake, yeah, getting the thing to work. Okay, thank you. So we're here today to look at the budget for 23-24. What we are focusing on today is the assumptions that are making up that base budget. So looking at everything that we've assumed in pulling our base together and having a chance to discuss those, challenge those, and agree if we think that they're correct and what we want to take forward. So as a bit of a backdrop to where we are, this is the General Fund, our medium-term plan for 23-24, as we forecast it back in February 2022. So we were showing a net cost of service of 11.4 million and funding of 10.4 million. So back in February, we were forecasting that we would have a £1 million budget gap for 23-24. Some of our assumptions At the time, we can see we were including a pay award of 2% plus the annual increments for staff. We were forecasting inflation on contracts of 2%, and we were assuming that our funding was going to be flat, so the same sort of levels that we were showing at 22-23. We're now well into 22-23, so we've moved on a fair way since February. We're all aware of the economic circumstances and what's been going on out there. And currently, for our forecast for 22-23, we've got a pressure of £800,000. Some of the key reasons for that on this slide and detailed in the report. So the pay award has increased. We are now seeing 1,925 per FTE. So that's a £580,000 pressure. That actually works out across all of the staff at around about 8% increase compared to a 2% that we had forecast in the budget. We're also seeing fuel and energy increases, so that's adding a pressure of about 80,000. And then we've got other inflationary increases through material costs, repair costs, and lots of other areas, and that's totaling about £150,000. For this year, we've got part of it covered because we put 500,000 from last year's surplus into the inflationary pressures reserve to cover some of that, but we are expecting the pressures to increase into 23-24. We're not expecting negative inflation to come along and take all that pressure away, and obviously we can only use that reserve once. It's a one-time only pot of funding. So looking at the current likely budget gap, taking all of those pressures into account and assuming that they're going to continue, we're looking at a budget gap of around £2 million. So it's actually gone up from 1 million to around 2. So in the report, we have set out all of the assumptions, the key assumptions within our workings, to challenge those and to have a look through those. So what we've got on these next slides, we've just got some of those on each slide, and we can pause and take a look at those and consider each one in turn. So this one sets out the employee costs initially. So we have the pay award. As we discussed, that's now 1,925 per FTE in 22-23, higher than any of us would have expected. Currently, we are looking at a pay award for 23-24. We're forecasting in the budget 4% for that. So that is in line with some of our discussions with other Suffolk authorities. We're thinking about putting that at 4% within our base budget figures for 23-24. We've also got a pay review that was committed to by councillors and the Chief Executive in 2022. At the moment, we've had a very sort of broad brush estimate of £500,000 in the 23-24 budget for that. When it comes to pensions, we are removing a lump sum contribution to the pension deficit and increasing the rate that we pay against all employees as an employer contribution. And that's following a discussion with Suffolk County Council and looking at the position of the fund. And that will reduce costs, so that's a small saving for 23-24 of 151,000. And then we've got the vacancy management factor that we have in our budget currently. It's currently at 5%. We are proposing that we keep that at 5% for staff turnover, and reflecting the fact that we never have 100% of our staff in post at any one time, at all the time. So because of the increase in staff costs and staff costs from the pay awards, that would have an increased saving effectively of 83,000. Yeah, sure. Okay, so I shall pause there then and have a chance to take any questions. Any comments?
Thank you. Yes, Rebecca, I've got a couple of questions for you. Just to clarify some of it. So the first line pay award, that's in this current year.
Yeah.
And that is the only pay award, apart from increments, that people will be awarded. That's the only pay award this year, which is 8% of their pay.
So the pay award for 22-23 was 1,925 per FTE. That's the only pay award. That works out around 8% per FTE when you take it across
Yeah.
all of the staff.
Okay. So the 4% that you're projecting for the following year, why have you chosen 4%? It's having had quite a big percentage this year. You've assumed quite a big percentage again next year.
Yes, and that was taken on discussion with the other Suffolk authorities. The truth is we don't know. We obviously we don't know what that is going to be. It's agreed nationally and it's very much out of our hands. It was felt that there could be a pressure on pay, that it could go up to 4%. But that's something that we can discuss and review.
But whatever it is will be mandatory on you to pay.
Yeah.
Okay. When is the review taking place? The pay review, is that underway now or? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we have consultants in. We have that piece of work is being undertaken currently. I don't have the details myself of where that's at, but I do know it's being undertaken.
Yeah. And I don't quite understand the 26% and remove the lump sum. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So for 22-23, there's an employer's contribution based on each employee's salary, which I believe works out at 23% for each employee. But we also have a lump sum that we're making towards the deficit, pension fund deficit. The valuation has been positive, the latest valuation. So in discussion with Suffolk County Council, we've reviewed what our contribution should be. What we are looking at is, rather than having a deficit contribution and a 23% for each member of staff, we're changing it to 26% and removing the lump sum deficit contribution.
Yeah. So is it difficult to see why you needed that lump sum when you're keeping pace by your contributions into the pension scheme with 23%? Is that 23% not accurate then?
It will vary from valuation to valuation. So the valuation will take into account all of the investments and everything that's in the fund. And that obviously fluctuates as the market fluctuates. So every 3 years we'll have a reassessment of what that position is.
So I think the staff employers' contribution is about 25.5% for local authority staff, isn't it?
Yes, I don't know what that is across all authorities, and I think it's set by individual authorities.
Okay. Well, that's all my questions for the moment. Thank you.
Pension, they tend to do a full revaluation, I think, every 3 years. And depending upon where you either end up paying to fill a gap, or in this case, it looks like we've maybe overpaid, or the valuation of the pension fund has gone up significantly, such that we don't need to top it up. So it's good news for us, otherwise we might have been adding even more pain.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You have a question?
Does that mean we've over-put money into it then?
When you do the pension what do you need to put into the pension fund to make sure there's enough pension in there? I mean, that varies every year. People leave, different salary rates, the fund valuation goes up and down depending upon where it's invested. So it's almost impossible to get it 100% right each year. In the past, we've had a shortfall and we've had to contribute to bridge that gap. We fortunately managed to do that, and now we're in a position where we can actually reduce that lump sum payment, so it's good.
But didn't you say it was 17%? It's normally 17, and this is 26, so that's like a lot more than there should be in there. Did you mention 17? Sorry, I thought I had just... Sorry, I thought you said... But what should this be then?
Well, according to the valuers, it should be 26%, which is what we're now paying. But in 3 years' time, who knows, it might go up to 28% or down to 24%, or they might ask for another lump sum to bridge a gap. It swings around each year, every 3 years when they do the full evaluation, so this is nothing unusual. I mean, it's good. In the past we have had a shortfall, so, and that has been quite expensive to fill that, but we've no need to do that anymore. Are you happy with the assumptions that we've made on the pay awards?
Just another question on the pay awards, the pay review. How did you arrive at the 500k?
The 500,000 is as I say, a very broad estimate of a potential cost. We obviously at this point we don't know what that cost is going to be, so it was taken as an amount per FTE, just as a very, very broad brush estimate of what it could be, so that there's something in there.
Do you kind of think, well, the worst case scenario would be $1 million and the best case scenario would be sort of 100,000 and we'll take the middle point? Is that how you kind of do it?
Yes, we did consider different options of what it could be. So it could be, obviously, it could be much higher. We looked at a potential cost, but yeah, we did take the kind of the middle road on this one.
Rebecca, when would we know a better estimate? When's the work due to be completed?
So as Rebecca has mentioned, we have got consultants working with the People Board at the moment. It's difficult to say exactly when we might know, but they are in the stage of starting to look at job descriptions at the moment. So we would hope early next year we should have some idea of the kind of scale of impact.
Would it be fair to say that you've just assumed that everyone will go up by 10,000 a year? With some winners and some losers?
We don't know until the work is complete what it will mean, obviously, for individual people. So it was just very much how can we estimate what an amount could be? Yeah, there's no real detail behind that at this point.
I mean, I think it's going to be more likely to be a grade and job specific. So somebody, I don't know what the grades are, but somebody on a grade 7 in one area may get 10,000, whereas somebody on a grade 7 in another area may not get anything because the job importance or difficulty in filling the vacancies has switched. So I don't think it's straightforward as saying it's £10,000 per head.
Sorry, won't it just be a job evaluation, not how difficult it is to fill that job?
Well, that's part of a job evaluation, I think. It's no use you saying that the job's worth 30,000 if you can never find anybody to fill it, because the job is therefore evaluated at, say, 40,000.
Gerda.
Yes, we're just having a look at that at the moment in terms of the scope of the consultant's work. It is, as you would imagine, a very detailed piece of work. It will be benchmarked against external factors, but it is obviously looking at the grade, as Dave said, not the people. I think that's why we're being a little bit vague about the amount, just because genuinely until we get into that piece of work, and where we will try to sort of group similar roles in similar graded roles. We'll try to group those to make the process a little bit quicker, but it is a detailed piece of work that we're doing.
Councillor Dawson. Yeah.
Yes, can I just ask, I mean, I know that a number of us voted against the senior leadership increase, and here it says the average increase is 8%. Does that mean that some of these people will be getting lower down the line? Are they getting, say, a 10 or 12% because this is an average, or is this average really pulled up because a lot of the people at the higher end are getting a big increase because they're obviously earning more money? I mean, when you look at national averages, it is just really shocking to see this, isn't it, really? I mean, I know inflation is going up, but these are really high. I just think it doesn't bear well for Babergh to have made this decision.
This is statutory. This is out of our control.
Well, I know.
We haven't made this decision.
But what is it that's drawing it? Can I just ask, what is it that's drawing up? Is it the money at the high end, or is it increases for people at the lower end, which are larger?
Yes, so the 8% is the average based on the 1,925 per full-time equivalent. So the people that are lower paid on the lower ranges, that 1,925 is obviously a higher percentage for them. Those at the top end are around sort of the SLT level. Obviously 1,925 would be a much smaller percentage increase, but that is the national agreed 1,925 per employee, and it just happens to work out for our makeup of staff that it's around 8% on average across all of those.
I mean, the key is that hopefully it's benefiting the people that need it most by giving a higher percentage to the people on a lower salary.
I could just come in here and say it's not actually a higher percentage for the people on lower salaries, because if it's based on £1,925 per head, full-time equivalent, yes, it's a higher percentage for somebody who's only earning £20,000 a year, but it's still £1,925. They're not going to get more than that, are they?
Well, no, but if you get £1,900 and you're only on 19,000, then that's a better increase than if you're on 90,000.
Difficult in that point of view. I think what we should be looking at here is the fact that we're talking about £1,925 per full-time equivalent. That's the amount they're going to get. Because to talk about percentages, it's going to vary enormously depending on the average salary that they're on now.
But as Melanie says, that's the designated increase, so we can't really do much about it.
Sorry, come in on that. This is a table of assumptions. It's not an assumption, though, is it?
No, and that is a known increase. What this table is seeking to do is to look at what has changed since we did the budget in February. So in February we had put in a 2% increase into our 22-23 budget, which then obviously feeds on to 23-24. But in reality, that increase of the 1,925 works out more like 8%. So this is showing that there's a pressure that will continue because this year's pay award has been more like 8% than the 2% that we had in the budget.
If I could just say, I mean, I don't, none of us are kind of the officers are the experts at dealing with government when it comes to settlements and working out finances. So all we can do is ask the questions, and so yeah, which I think we've done for this particular part of the table.
Okay, so the next section in the report, which we're still looking at the general fund, is around supplies and services and contracts. So within electricity, we are seeing some pressure from the increase in prices from approximately £0.14, so 14p per kilowatt hour, up to 24. The amount that we're including in our budget assumes that there's been no change in the use of the council's assets, and that is showing a pressure of around 90,000. We've got some better news when it comes to gas, in that our current contract has been fixed until the end of September 23, so we're not seeing much pressure there. The majority of our use applies to the leisure centres, and any increases there should be recovered through the contract with the provider. Insurance premiums is an area where we are seeing some pressure. We have got the contract being renewed from January, and sort of indications from the market is that we can expect to see an increase in premiums of at least 10% from that on that insurance contract. Similarly, in shared legal service, we're expecting to see a pressure of around 27,000 based on previous years' use of that service and uplift for salaries and other costs. Within our contracts, we've got a 4% uplift on the refuse contract. So we have a cost pressure in 22-23 for increase in staff costs, and then of around 50,000, and then we've got contract discussions still to be finalised, but we've assumed 4% for the time being because of the pressure that we know is out there. And then shared revenues partnership, we've got an estimate based on inflationary increases, so as you'll appreciate, a lot of that is staff costs. So we have included a 7% increase on there currently, £75,000 pressure. So I'll pause there for any questions or comments or feedback.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Is there more of a breakdown possible on the shared legal services? That 11% is quite significant. I'd like to understand if that is largely salaries. It says other costs as well. So is there any more information?
I'm afraid I don't have any more information on that currently, but I can certainly go away and find out what that has been made up of.
I have a question as well. On gas, if we got a price fixed until September 23, what happens for the next 9 months or 7 months of the year? I presume it's going to go up, but we haven't put that in.
The truth is, obviously, we don't know what that's going to be when it comes to September, and that is some work that we are continuing to look at. So we will come back in January with some pressures and savings options, and that will be part of it. Will involve looking at some of these pressures and building in anything else that we know may still come. But at the moment, that is our best estimate for what we've got in our base budget.
I don't wish to be the sage of Omaha, as he's called, but all the markets at the moment are showing gas prices falling, and presumably they'll be renegotiating the price in the middle of the summer when demand is probably down anyway. So with a bit of luck, they might come back into reasonable proportions.
Yeah, I think we're all hoping that energy prices come back down again next year.
Well, electricity is slightly different because it has to be generated, whereas gas is just sort of sucked out of the ground and sent off to somewhere. And with liquefied petroleum gas coming now from North America and from Mozambique and everywhere else, reliance on gas from the east is less of a concern. All happy on this particular slide? The concern might be, from my point of view, might be on the price of fuel for vehicles, because that doesn't seem to bear any relationship to anything at the moment. It seems to be all over the place.
Well, can I just note the biggest item in that you've just gone through is the refuse contract, 2.5 million, which is a quarter of, it's 25% of our in-house staff costs are being spent on someone else's staff. So, I guess it's a contract shared between all the district councils and the borough in Suffolk, isn't it? Is that right? So do we get any, I guess my question is, do we get any benefit from having this, what's the word, from bulk purchasing with all the other districts?
There will undoubtedly be economies of scale from bulk purchasing. Do we have a breakdown of what that is? No, I don't think we have that today. But there will undoubtedly, even in fuel bulk buying, there is always an economies of scale. But we don't have those figures, the breakdown of that today.
I think there's two elements to the increase in the costs. One is volume. Every new house that we build and gets bought requires additional collection. And then there's the cost itself of the staff and the vehicles, etc.
How often is the contract renewed?
This is, I'm filling in from Melissa today. She probably know that off the top of her head. I'm afraid I don't. But the fact that it says that contract negotiations are being finalised, that does give us an opportunity to obviously negotiate strongly to drive down that price as much as possible, which is why we've put assumptions in at the moment. So rest assured we will be negotiating that in so far as we're able to in terms of the best possible price.
Does it go to competitive tender, do you know?
I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest. I know that there is an annual renewal, so even where the contract is set for a fairly long period of time, there is an annual uplift to reflect growth and prices. I believe that's what this is, rather than a full re-tender of the contract. It's the annual renewal, look at prices and uplift.
The key here is, of course, the title at the top, which says assumptions, because at the moment there are lots of assumptions being made because we don't know the definitive answer at the moment. And we have to base the budget on something. Any other questions?
The next slide that we have is looking at sales fees and charges and the council's interest. So planning income, we are seeing reduced income in 22-23 due to the level of uncertainty out in the housing market. So our starting position for 23-24 is based on our 22-23 expected outturn. So we're seeing a £220,000 pressure as a result of that compared to what we originally thought we would see in 23-24. In terms of garden and trade waste, we are seeing an increase in subscriptions for the garden waste service currently. We don't know whether that will continue, but within our assumptions, we are assuming again that we're going to use the 22-23 forecast outturn as our starting position for 23-24, and that shows a slight saving or a slight benefit of 39,000. Building control, again, lots of uncertainty in the market, and significant change in regulations has kept income up a little bit for 22-23. So at the moment we are assuming that will be the same as the 22-23 budget in 23-24. In terms of interest, we have seen interest rates go up. For our long-term borrowing, though, that is all at fixed rates, and we are seeing a slight reduction in our costs just due to repayments on some annuity rate borrowing. So that is seeing an £81,000 benefit. For short-term borrowing, we are seeing some pressure, and the cost of borrowing is assumed to increase based on gilt years forecast. We've not yet factored in any new borrowing for future capital programme, and we are seeing a increase of pressure for 23-24 of up to 850,000 on short-term borrowing. So we shall pause there for questions and comments.
The reason that it's so high, obviously apart from the interest rates going up considerably, is that over the past few years we've benefited from having short-term borrowing at very low rates, which was fine until we got hit with a significant increase in the rates. And unfortunately, a lot of those short-term borrowings, I guess, have matured, and we've now got to replace them. And it seems as though one of the ways that we would need to replace it is with borrowing at these kind of rates. As it says there, this doesn't include any new borrowing. So for any projects that we take on board where we require additional borrowing, that will be on top of this 850.
So from that, with your permission, Chair, the question follows then, are we assuming that there will be no new borrowing?
I think that will have to come later when we start to look at pressures and savings. We come back in January, once it's been sort of worked through with Cabinet as well, that we are pulling together a draft capital programme, and that will feed into this, and obviously will be scrutinised in the usual way, and those discussions and decisions will have to be made at that point.
There'll certainly be a greater emphasis on a rate of return. We won't be just borrowing for the sake of it, not at these rates. There'll have to be some kind of material financial benefit that goes alongside it.
Thank you. Just go back slightly to garden trade waste income. Had I understood correctly that we won't be able to charge for that service in the future, and so therefore that income will disappear?
There is the recycling and waste strategy coming. I personally don't know the details of what's involved with that. What I do know is it's not impacting in 23-24. I think it's following after. And my understanding is that the government has said there will be new burdens funding to cover the cost of bringing that in. But further work will have to be done as we understand more of the details and we get more details on what that will look like and what the impact will be going forwards.
Even though it sounds like it's a popular service, that is, you've got new subscribers, so people are happy to pay that because it's their choice. Is there any lobbying to government that you can do on that?
Well, I think from our point of view, yes, I think there will be, because the problem is each of the councils operate in different ways. So Babergh will charge for the service because we believe that if it's an optional service, then you should pay if you choose to pick up the option, whereas somebody like Ipswich, they don't. It includes it in their council tax. So in fact, the brown bin service is free. Well, it isn't because it's included in a higher council tax. But apart from that, there will be if they go down the route that they're talking about, then there'll be food waste collection as well, which God knows how much that's going to cost. So potentially what they're recommending could be significantly more expensive than what we've got at the moment. So the garden and trade waste, this is just the increase in the number of bins that we will be collecting. It doesn't include any potential increase in the price of so doing.
That's correct, yes. It's just the increase based on numbers at this point. There's no increase in cost there.
And that kind of discussion will be for later. We're not asking you to come up with any solutions at this point. We'll be looking at that over the next month or so. But these are really just to get the base levels agreed.
When we introduced the brown bin scheme, just one of the first things that I was involved with when I came onto the council nearly 20 years ago, it was on the basis that it would be as near as possible a cost-neutral system across the council, in other words, paid for itself. So on occasions it makes a small profit because we've got a lot of the balance between customers paying and the cost of collecting their bins means we have a slight surplus. Other times it will be costing the council a slight amount of money for the simple reason that we have to put on another cart, and until that cart gets up to capacity, then there's a slight sort of deficit on the system. So it's a swings and roundabout system, but it's as near as possible to cost neutral across the system. But that could all, as you say, go up in smoke, if you like, if they compulsorily put in a freebie system. But as you consider that electric cars are now going to be charged road fund tax and that won't come in until 2025, I'm not quite sure how quickly they're going to change the bin system round. The timescale could be rather long.
Bans. I mean, each brown bin is only £50, and they'll keep the brown bins. It's whether we have 7 things for recycling, or do we have 4, or do we have 3? But we're not going to be getting rid of the brown bins, are we?
But the budget would have to reflect all sorts of different things, because the more collection bins you have, the more you have to modify your tanker fleet to collect them.
Well, yeah.
And I've just come from the West Country, where they have all sorts of little boxes outside with different items in. They have to effectively do what the MRF does on their doorstep. And the vehicles that come round have got so many little holes in the side of them, they'd be completely unsuitable for use round here. So it's a different thing altogether.
But the point is, at this point, we're assuming for 23-24 that the service will be largely the same. So at this point, we don't need to worry about.
Councillor Lindsay, do you have a question?
No.
Can just go back to planning, because we've just gone over that. So it's assumed that will continue that will increase. I'm getting my fingers in brackets, not quite right in my head. So is that 220 that you projected for 2023?
It's a £220,000 pressure, so we're expecting the income to go down.
That. Why the sort of forecast that's quite gloomy?
We have seen income reduce during 22-23 as the economic situation has worsened and tightened. We just have seen less planning applications and less income coming in, and that's in line with the national picture. So we are expecting that to continue into 23-24.
I think that move is probably prudent when you consider that we have something like 10 years worth of government targets of housing with permission now, which means that there's hardly any need for any new positions to come forward. So there's bound to be a downturn in the number of people applying for permissions. And that probably applies more to the big developers than anything else. There's a lot of them out there.
But we've also seen that because the JLP has been effectively refused, there are a number of large plans included in the JLP that are now in limbo, really, and would face pretty stiff questioning from locals, councillors, and from the planning officers. So those schemes may not come forward, so there could be quite a big chunk of income that we don't get.
So the delay in the GLP has actually cost us a lot of money then?
Well, you could say that. I'm not certain I would totally agree with that, but it probably hasn't done us any favours.
Okay, so the final slide for looking at the general fund is our funding and our income. For the government grants, we haven't had any indication of what this will be yet for 23-24. I believe we're expecting a draft settlement on the 21st of December from central government for that. But in the meantime, we're assuming that that is going to be a similar level to 22-23. There's no indication that we're going to get severe cuts, and there's no indication we're going to get increases either. So for the time being, we've had to assume that that will stay flat. We have amended the new homes bonus to show the latest growth figures, so we're assuming that that will continue on the same basis and the same calculation as last year, but there will be a slight drop potentially in the amount that we receive of that, just 14,000. For council tax, we have worked through the latest tax base figures. You'll see on the slide those figures are highlighted in yellow because they do differ from the latest information we had at the time that the report went to print. So the report had a 2.5% tax base growth, which was based on the overall growth position in housing and estimated. We have now worked through the actual growth and translated that into Band D equivalents. So what we are seeing now is a 1.6% increase in tax base, giving a £99,000 benefit in 23-24. The current budget position is showing a Band D increase of £5. That was the maximum possible without a referendum. The government did announce last week as part of its autumn statement that we could increase up to 3%, so districts up to 3%, and then a social care levy for those authorities with a social care function could have an additional 2% up to 5%. The £5 that we've got in our budget currently actually works out at 2.82% increase. So although there is some flexibility to go up to 3% now, that would have a benefit of £11,000, so not a significant impact. We've also got the local council tax reduction scheme, potential increased from 95% to 100%. That is currently out for consultation. If that does come in, we'll have £164 pressure as a result of that. In terms of business rates, it's very difficult to estimate currently what that will be, so we are assuming a similar position to 22-23, and then a slight growth as part of the Suffolk pool. We've estimated 2% growth on that. Okay, so I'll pause there for any more questions or feedback.
I think we can just say that you can see there that two of the big numbers are dependent totally on what the government decide they want to do. It's very difficult at this time to be able to predict. We're not very optimistic, so they may be the best case scenarios. The LCTRS impact, although it's projected to cost us 164,000, I think we're hopeful that in the fullness of time, because of the change in the way that the calculations are done and the frequency of the calculations, it will make SRP more efficient, and therefore we hope that we'll recover that cost with a lower charge from SRP.
comments or questions, councillors? No?
Just on the new homes bonus, I've kind of lost track of, because the government keep changing things, and what was their last position on what they'd be doing with the new homes bonus?
We were expecting to see a complete review of the funding mechanisms and the new homes bonus. Because we haven't seen anything yet, and there's not going to be time to do that for this financial year, we have had to assume that they will roll it over. And we have had advice from Pixel, who give us advice and do modelling on local government funding generally, and that is their view also, is that it will roll over in the same position for 23-24. And obviously we'll keep looking out for any new advice or any consultations and reviews of the funding going forwards.
So have I got it? Because my assumption was that they'd said all along that they'll be phasing it out, and if they don't produce this review, won't the phase out happen then? And therefore will the impact on us be worse than it was in the previous year if they're phasing out more of the new homes bonus?
Yes, potentially it has phased out to a degree, so we have seen some amounts come down. There were some legacy payments that have reduced, but I don't know at this stage what the future of that is going to be, so we'll have to keep you updated as that progresses.
Thank you. As there is estimated to be quite a big hole in finances, is there any work on finding efficiency savings aside from everything that we've looked at now?
Yes, there is a separate piece of work going on to look at what those could be, what efficiency and savings options there are, and also any other pressures that may be new. So that is currently going sort of through the SLT, and then it will go through Cabinet, and then it will come back to yourselves in January to review that.
Each team has been targeted with trying to reduce their budget, and they've given a lot of thought and time to it. We have some estimates, but nothing that we can put into our budget calculations yet.
It's not likely to be 2 million, is it? Let's face it.
No, it's probably more likely to be changes in service levels.
Hold on. Councillor Lindsay, please. Fiona.
I was just going to add, there's a separate group going on looking at income generation as well, accepting the fact about savings alone probably won't help meet this gap. So there is a separate group which will feed into the budget timescales that Rebecca just mentioned.
Quick question for you, Rebecca, from me. We've been saving money in here this morning because the heating hasn't been on. Where do the costs regarding our reduction in accommodation and everything else in Endeavour House appear within these figures, or don't they?
So those reductions in costs are already included in our baseline figures. So the 2 million gap has already got those reductions built into it.
Are we going to move to debate, or I don't know whether to reserve what I'm going to say?
According to the papers, we're looking at both of these aspects together.
I'll just carry on, shall I?
So we can carry on and look at, if you would prefer to look at them in two separate bits, then we can look at it as two separate bits.
No, I'll just suggest. My thoughts are that we're unlikely to see savings coming through efficiencies or income to close that gap. Otherwise, you would be presenting that more forcefully today, I think. At what stage do we say we can't really afford to apply that pay review, which is possibly £500,000? Because the way I see it, yes, you can do it, but it could lead to staff reductions. So carry on, and then later on consider, oh, can we actually afford all our staff? So then we start looking at staff reductions, which I don't think is what staff actually want.
I was just going to respond, I guess, by saying that today for overview and scrutiny, it's really about have we got the right assumptions. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but at the moment, until we've done more work, you know, there are some unknowns around sort of meeting that gap, but these are the assumptions we're presenting to ONS today, and I guess it would be useful for us to have some feedback on those assumptions. Maybe that was some feedback on those assumptions, but they're the ones that we are looking at the moment in terms of assumptions.
Well, I appreciate
when you're looking at £2 million, nothing's going to be off the table. We have to produce a balanced budget. End of story.
I think it's fair to say that the papers in front of us show that there's this 2 million gap. The assumptions are in there which show how that 2 million gap has been arrived at. It's up to us to say whether we think the right assumptions have been made or whether there are some assumptions that haven't been included that could be included, not to actually come up with a figure that is going to either reduce or increase the 2 million gap. It seems that there is already a work in progress to try and reduce the gap by making some savings in various departments, but that is not for us to decide here and now. It's for us to comment on the assumptions that have been made.
I agree, but it needs to be flagged up.
Well, I think we'll take that on board as one of the many ways that we hopefully can get to the 2 million. I mean, from my point of view, my concern is if I was the government, I'd look at that new homes bonus line and say, well, that's paid, you've had all the new houses, why do you need to be paid an extra bonus for it? I'd be looking, if I was going to try and save money, that's the way I'd do it if I was the government.
I think it's probably, without getting too political, I think it's probably fair to say that that was said some time ago, but they've taken their time about doing anything about it to our benefit at the moment. So we'll move on to the housing part of the...
Okay, so look at the position for the HRA. So looking at 22-23, we were projecting a budget surplus of 500,000. We have seen some pressures, as you could imagine, in 22-23. So the pay award equally has had an impact on the HRA as it has done the general fund. We've also seen significant pressures on subcontractors and increases in material costs. And we are expecting all of those pressures to continue into 23-24. So for 22-23, we're actually looking at a budget deficit of 16,000 on the HRA compared to a surplus in the budget of 500,000. So this slide shows most of the expenditure and income impact for the HRA. So when we look at the pay award, again, that's the same 1925 per FTE. We've also projected a 23-24. We're including 4% for the national pay award, which I've said is out of our control, but we're including 4% for that at this point. We've got the pay review within here as well. Pension is the same same position as for the general fund, so the increase in the employer contribution and removal of the lump sum contribution. Also, premises costs, repairs and maintenance. At the moment, we're looking at CPI of around 10%, and this is based on our Q2 forecast and expectation of inflation continuing into 23-24 and not reversing. So that is the biggest impact that we're seeing on the HRA, is around repairs and maintenance costs. So £1.4 million pressure being included in the 23-24 budget for that currently. So contractors, we are projecting a 10% increase, and also for supplies, materials and tools. So that's based on our experience of 2022 at the moment, plus an inflationary increase. Gas and electricity, we've had an estimate from Savills based on a SIPFA projections, and we're looking at a 100% increase in costs for the gas and electricity for the HRA, of total of 272,000. Water costs, again, we're seeing an increase around 10%. And then external interest on loans, so there's no increase on those because most of the borrowing for the HRA is fixed long-term loans, so we're just seeing a small impact on that. So I will pause there for any questions or feedback on those.
So that total, sorry, I may have missed this when you outlined it. The total increase is a lot larger than a lot larger than 400 and, am I looking at the right? Oh, I see, yeah. So we've got in our papers total assumed increase in expenditure of 2.2 million, and that I think says 2.356. So it's gone up slightly, is that right? The increase in expenditure. Or are we just looking at a rounding thing? Mind you, there's a difference between 2.2 and 2.357.
Yes, those figures have changed. I'll check where that has come from. Yes, there have been some changes in some of the staff numbers, I believe.
The biggest issue here is obviously the premises costs, which, as it says, it's all materials, it's staff, it's in addition consultants where we have to bring them in. We know we've got an awful lot of work to do in repairing a lot of our properties. We've been criticised for the state of our houses, so we can't get away with assuming that we're not going to be spending a lot of money on this.
Councillor Osborne, you'd like to make a point.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the point of the maintenance and repairs, we are going through a period of transformation in the building services, and that includes the diagnostic analysis of all the work that's being undertaken. So until we actually get to the end of that tunnel where we get some more light, the costs will increase rather than decrease, but at least it will lead to eventually, in about 2 to 3 years, it's not going to be short term, it's going to be longer term,
then the costs will start to come down. But as Councillor Busby has alluded to, we have got a lot of properties out there that were built in the 60s and 70s and are going to need a great deal of work spent on them, and that's where we need to ensure that those properties are brought up to a standard that is suitable for our tenants. So it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it will, all the work that's going on in building services, it will get better.
Councillor Lindsay.
The assumptions for the increase in contractors' costs and supplies, equipment, tools and water are all 10%. Why are they so much larger than the assumption for the pay award?
I can't tell you exactly why they're larger than the pay award, but what they are is they're based on a contractor's price. So they will be based on what the average is showing under market conditions. And that could be a combination of factors. Contractors can be pricing in additional risk, for example, so it's more than just contractors' salaries. It will be the other factors that wrap around that. And I suspect, I don't know that without talking to the individual contractors, but I suspect they'll be pricing in greater risk for each project.
Basically, we have less control over those things. We have no control over those things, really. I mean, we can negotiate, but we've all seen what's been happening in the building market in terms of materials and costs of resources.
Thank you. Did I miss something? Why is gas and electricity 100% increase?
Yes, I don't know the detail behind the gas, electricity and the HRA, so I'll have to take that one away to follow up on, but I do recognise that is different to the pressures that we are seeing in the general fund, so I'll pick that one up.
I presume it's our houses, is it, Jan?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's the sheltered housing accommodation as well as the temporary accommodation. So, and it's the communal services within some of those where we've got leaseholders and mixed tenure.
So they're not up for the same kind of negotiation we have with the larger contracts with our suppliers. They're more down to the open market, I guess.
Can't negotiate a bit better, seeing as we're a good customer, and we're good for the money.
Yeah, but compared to British Gas, we're a drop in the ocean, aren't we? Literally.
Well, I wouldn't comment on British Gas after what was said in the CAB report, but still. Yes, it does seem a bit. I agree with Councillor Barrett. It does seem a little bit strange when talking about gas and electricity 100% across the board, bonk. Then you look at our service charges. Water's up 11%, whereas we're budgeting on water up 10%. Heating charge 8%, service charge 5%. We know that, well, we assume that energy prices are at their maximum about now and should, in theory, start to come down. Unless the French start pinching all our electricity because their nuclear power stations aren't working. It just seems a little bit excessive at 100%. Perhaps not going to make an awful lot of difference to final figures, but
I'm not convinced that we are at peak yet in terms of. I don't think we are at the peak in terms of energy supply prices yet, and we also don't know what the government's intervention was only going to last until, was it the middle of next year or something? So. The lady noddeth.
We haven't got onto that yet. We're just about to go on to that now.
Yep, so the next slide has the income assumptions. So for dwelling rental income, at the moment we have included 5% applied to our current housing stock, and at the moment we've not put any new build figures into that estimation. So we're looking at a 1.1 million increase in rental income as a result of that. Garage rents, we are assuming no increase to garage rents. It's hard to let, and the sites are currently under review. Service charges, so we've got 5% service charge, 8% heating and 11% water, and that's in line with the rental increase and utilities charge to meet 50% of the funding gap. So yeah, again, I will pause there for any questions or comments on those.
Why are we assuming that we're not going to build any or have any additional council stock in that year?
I think that's just a matter of not having those figures and not knowing what that will be. We can look at that as part of the next stage of the development of the budget, and when we look at pressures and savings, we can look at that then.
Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We actually have a target to acquire or build 65 each year over the next 5 years. Obviously, that will depend on where we are with the budget situation when we come to setting the budget. When we set that figure in the HRA business plan, we don't have a crystal ball. We weren't all aware of these cost of living crisis, etc., that was going to come forward. So we may possibly have to reduce that target for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on what other cost pressures we've got within the HRA. Retrofitting is one of them, bringing our properties back up to standard is another one, and making sure that our repair service is effective and efficient and making our properties the standard that they should be. So there's all those balances to think out before we look at now how many we're going to acquire or build. Obviously, from my point of view, I want to continue acquiring and building new homes. We desperately need them. The register is going up, it's not going down. So the need is getting more and more, but we do have to look at the balances. It's a bit like going round and twisting the plates, Robert, really, to see what's more important. They're all a priority as far as councillors are concerned. But I think once we get to the budget setting process, we will have identified what those priorities are, and then we'll be more understanding of what actually we can build or acquire in respect to properties over the next year, 2 years or 3 years. I hope that answers your question.
If I could just clarify a bit. So do we have, is there something in the housing business plan now that states a number of houses that we want to build in the 22-23 year?
65. 65.
So we're making an assumption here that we're not going to build the 65 houses that were in the business plan, which is, shouldn't we make the assumption that we are going to stick with the business plan, and then we have an open discussion about whether we want to or not, and we whack up the budget gap, and you know it's part of the saving. Maybe it's part of the savings we need to make. Maybe we should make it in the salary cuts. Maybe it could be somewhere else. But it looks like some assumptions here about where we're going to make savings have been made, i.e. about how many houses we're going to build.
The business plan, I think, quite rightly set a target for the number of houses we would like to build. What we need to build is probably a completely different figure. It's probably considerably higher. It all comes back as well as to whether those properties are available for us to acquire. And that depends upon the development of housing across the district in total, because it's linked to the 35% affordable housing target that is on most planning applications. So if they don't come forward, we can't build a house, we can't acquire a house that hasn't been built yet. So there are so many variables involved. I think it's probably the wise move to say, let's assume we don't have any, because if we do have 65 houses, it's not going to sort of rock the boat as far as these figures are concerned, but it is going to to contribute slightly towards them. Councillor Osborne.
Without running the risk of joining into the debate, with the greatest respect, Mr. Chairman, it's not about how many properties will come forward. I'm sure we'll be able to acquire or to build 65, providing we've got the money to do so. It's more about the budget itself rather than what's coming forward from developers or land that we acquire to build our own. It's about twisting the plates and coming up with the budget to deliver on all those priorities and needs that we've got coming forward.
Yeah, I mean, Robert, you're right. There will be some either new builds or new acquisitions between now and the end of 23-24 financial year, for which we will get some rent. But at this stage, we're not prepared to predict that. I mean, we've had some new builds. The biggest change will be in perhaps the 5%. I think we heard today that we may be allowed to increase the rental by 7%, which would make quite a significant difference to these accounts. Having said that, 7% is quite a big increase for our council taxpayers to pay. So we've got to try and balance that off, but that again is something that we'll look at in the future when we come to put forward a balanced budget.
So, sorry, you've raised another question now. Where does the 7% come from? It talks about 5% in there.
I think the government have issued, they normally have a ceiling that you can increase your rents by. They came out for consultation on a 3, 5 or 7% alternatives. We assumed that it probably would be 5%, and that's what we've built into this. It appears as though they've decided, probably as a result of what everybody was saying, because it has a significant impact. I mean, it doesn't sound a lot, 5%, 7%, but it's an ongoing 2% gap, and it mounts up within 2 or 3 years. You could be £1 million short. So they've gone with a bigger figure. But the situation is really fluid. All of these are our best estimates as they work on it yesterday. As tomorrow, we might need to change a few of them. But we can only go with what we know at the moment.
Sorry, is there currently a cap? Well, how much have we put up council rents in the past, I guess is my question.
Well, Jan can probably answer that, but again, we've had government fixed terms. For a few years it was minus 1%, and then it was plus 1%, and so it goes up and down, but yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Busby is absolutely correct. For 5 years, we had to actually reduce it by 1% year on year. And you never catch up on that, so there was great losses there. So once that 5 year was passed and we went into a period where we could start to increase them, we averaged it on a 2.5% increase. This year, for the 23-24 budget, members are going to have to make a really hard decision on it. There will be a member briefing to make members aware of the impact if they do or if they don't increase the rent. We've just been talking about the HRA budget and what priorities we've got and how we may not be able to deliver on all those priorities. So obviously what we charge for rent, if we do increase the rent, will be a big question for members coming forward. I think, as Councillor Busby has said, if we don't go with the 7%, we lose that year on year, and you never ever catch up on that. So, but it averages, Robert, about between 2.5%. I think it was last year it was 2.5%.
It was what, CPI plus 1%, I think, wasn't it, over the past? I think it was a price index plus 1%. Yeah.
Councillor Busby, will you please respond to questions rather than carry on the debate with other people in the chamber? Thank you.
Sorry, sir.
Just a quick point on this. Of course, it does highlight how complicated all these finances are and the assumptions that have to be made or cannot be made. We have to do a balancing act here. If we up council house rents, does that increase our bad debts proportionally? It's a difficult decision for us all to have to make. We can only start from one place, and this is the start point with the assumptions that we've made as to what the budget could look like, and the final figures will come before council in February. Any other points? Councillor Barrett.
Can I just make a request that when we do have to discuss whether it's 5 or 7% or whatever, that the figures are given to us as the actual rent that people pay, because it doesn't mean anything unless we understand that, really.
The portfolio holder for housing has taken that request on board, so portfolio holder for housing has taken that request on board. So, any other comments on the housing revenue account or questions for the portfolio holder and the officers? No? Oh.
It's perhaps a trivial point in terms of the sums, but I get, okay, well, I don't quite get why we're assuming no new houses, but I'll accept it. The assumption, you're also assuming no increase in garage rents, 0%. You're assuming a 5% rental increase in rents, but a 0% increase in rents for garages. Okay, there's going to be no new garages, but you're not putting the rent up on the existing ones. What? Or you're assuming we're not putting the rent up on the existing ones. What's the reason for that?
Have you seen the state of our garages?
That's a good reason. Yeah, that's the reason.
Councillor Osborne.
The thinking behind it is that there isn't the demand for our garages. So if we increase the rent, that would demand go down even less. So let's keep the income that we've got coming in from them rather than increase it and lose some of that income. It may be the right thinking, it may not, you may not agree with it, but that's the thinking behind it.
I know from my own ward that the garages are
too small.
well, they are. In actual fact, very few of them have cars in them, partly because they're used for storage, and partly because they were on the basis of a low ground rent for a lease on the site, and they put their own garage on them, a lot of which are asbestos, which they can't afford to dispose of. And so they're left to sort of rot in situ, and so the whole situation of garages across the whole district is going to have to be a very complicated one to sort out, to decide whether we're going to build some decent garages on there and put a decent rent on them if there's a demand, or whether we're going to turn them into houses. Not the garages themselves, but I mean build houses on those sites. So it's complicated, to say the least. Any other points on that? Well, I think we can. Thank you very much indeed for the answering the questions and presenting that. I think we can go into a debate now anyway to decide what we want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought with Councillor Lindsay, we've already debated a lot of this already.
Probably so, but it means it shouldn't take us long to come up with a proposal, then, should it? There are some recommendations in the papers. Draft budget assumptions are set out in the report for the 2023-24 general fund and the housing revenue account budget's been noted. And then it says the committee may make further recommendations as it deems appropriate. Are there anything else you would like to add to that?
Well, the point is really, it's early. I felt this meeting was taking place quite early, considering the budget is not until February. And it's difficult for us to get, there's so many uncertainties. And as you say, Rebecca, I think the figures will change, probably will change quite a bit till the final budget is approved. But it is a concern, because there's a lot of assumptions are worst case scenario possibly. And it's difficult for us to decide if that is realistic at the moment or too pessimistic, or who knows. But it is very early in the process. And I think probably we should note that for next year. See, we should monitor this and see if it proves to be actually too bit early for when we get to February and we are approving a budget. Does it look very much like what we've seen today? And then we might have to decide next year, or some of you who are elected decide next year, is it really a good idea to start so early when it's going to be subject to all this uncertainty?
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Melanie, it is early, but from the point of view of councillors who are not aware of things that go on within the HRA or the general fund, it's a good thing to have on the table. Although it might be changed, and although there are circumstances that could alter it and make it a lot different, I think it was a good presentation from our officers, and thank you very much. But you know, I still think that the more you know beforehand, the better you are placed when it comes to the decision making. Thank you.
Chair, can I just add that councillors last year felt that everything was too late, so we've tried to bring it forward this year so that you did have a look at the assumptions that were being made and could feed into them if you thought that they were woefully out, you know, way out. So that the idea was to try to bring it earlier to see if you could get something more out of the process, really. But, you know, it's difficult.
Councillor Busby, you want to say something?
It actually isn't that early when you think about it. We're at the end of November. In 3 months' time, February, we've got to have an agreed balanced budget. And in that process, that will come to the Cabinet in January. There'll be an all-member briefing in December. It doesn't give us a lot of time to batten down the hatches. As I said at my introduction with Peter and the Wolf, our Peter was Catherine Steele, who has taken her hat where she pulled the rabbits out of and disappeared. So we're in the process of trying to replace the hat and the rabbits. Sorry? Yeah. So I think it's important that councillors understand and accept that the next 3 months are going to generate some difficult conversations. We can't leave it until after Christmas before we start having these conversations.
I think it's important as well that we looked at these assumptions because next month is an all-member briefing and we want to have something, I won't say concrete for them, but certainly in close to the final stages of preparation for the all-member briefing before it then goes on to Cabinet. And then, of course, we have another look at it in January to decide on our final sort of look-see at it. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very, in not actually thanking our two councillors here, Councillor Busby and Councillor Jan Osborne, for their input into this, which has been very helpful. And thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm just wondering if we should note this, but also note that the big ticket items are completely dependent on the whim of the government and the markets. So I'm not sure we can, you know, they're trying to gaze into a crystal ball. We're trying to gaze into a crystal ball, but, you know, I'm not sure we can add much value, really. So I think it's worth noting that a lot of the assumptions are sort of dependent on things that we can't control and have no real big
Probably
insight.
why there are assumptions rather than facts. If we knew exactly what was going to happen, it would be a lot easier, agreed. But I think we should probably not stray towards having a snipe at governments or anybody else for that matter, but if we are going to put something to that effect together, that we note this assumptions report but the basis for the assumptions is liable to change because of factors outside of our control.
Can I just say, it's certainly been a very useful exercise, I think, you challenging the assumptions, because, you know, these guys are looking at the numbers all the time, and you can get number blindness almost. So it's useful to have councillors to provide some kind of level of review.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose that we go with the recommendations that are before us.
Chair, I'm happy to do hands.
We'll have a show of hands then, members, on this one. The proposal is that it's the recommendations are as per those in your papers. All those in favour?
Thank you, Chair. That is unanimous.
Good decision, because if you hadn't approved it, we'd have brought another one back next week, and the week after, and the week after, until you bloody well had improved it.
That concludes the meeting, councillors. Thank you very much indeed for your participation and your useful comments.